Let me know.
Good evening, folks.
Good evening. Good evening.
It is Friday night. We are live. It's not Thursday. You're not in the wrong space. You haven't gone back in time. It's Friday. It's 6, and we are W.A.R.
We are resilient. We are W.A.R.
We're here to, share upon the stories from last week. We started talking about what was going on with the news sharing stories of, veterans as fraudsters and the things like that. And we, discussed what was going on with actual fraudsters that have, been disingenuous to veterans and the VA alike. And we just want to follow up on that with some information that's come out since then from the national VSOs, the commanders of the VFW, the American Legion, and the DAV have all condemned the articles. A veteran wrote in, several veterans wrote into the editorial section, and they put it together to say why this post and these articles are hurting them as a veteran. And also we'll touch on about, how Travis and I, feel about the articles and that. I just, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post the articles up here. I shared them on the event on the Facebook. So if you guys want to check that out, you can. I'm going to see if this will work here. And I want to start with media. All right, so this one here, I know you guys probably can't read it, so that's why I'm going to read it for you guys. But this is the first article, one from the American Legion. National Commander Dan Wiley issued the following statement following a story in the Washington Post. Millions of men and women have served our nation with pride, honor, and sacrifice, Wiley said. As a nation, we promise to provide for them, care for their injuries, and support their family. It's the least we could do for our nation's honorable veterans. This outrageous story in the Washington Post fails to accurately portray how the Department of Veteran Affairs upholds our nation's promise to veterans. Keep in mind not all veterans' injuries are as obvious as missing limbs, severe burns, or scarred skin. Though countless veterans endured those ailments, the highly inflammatory article misconstrues the range of service-connected injuries and illnesses that veterans endure, and that VA provides the much-needed resources to treat. Among them, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, cancers from burn pits and other toxic exposures, moral injuries, and more. The Post paints a one-sided, unbalanced view of the entire veteran population based on a few cases of veterans wrongly defrauding VA. Just as it is wrong for veterans to take advantage of the system, it is wrong for the Washington Post to target veterans who have earned their benefits. While the Post is manipulating the truth, the American Legion continues to do what it does best: serve our veterans as we have since World War I and heroes came home. As the nation's largest veterans service organization, we will continue to fight for benefits our nation's heroes earned when they swore to protect our nation with their lives. So that was the Legion. Here we have a local, Coleman Nee.
Yep.
He used to be the head of the Veterans Services in Massachusetts. He is now the national commander for the DAV. DAV was shocked and disgusted to read the recent article by the Washington Post alleging that disabled veterans are swamping the VA with false, fraudulent, and dubious disability claims for injuries and illnesses that are not legitimate. Nothing could be further from the truth, and the Post should be ashamed for publishing such an inaccurate and distorted piece. The article points to a large number of veterans awarded disability compensation in recent years and a small number of outrageous frauds committed by a relative handful of individuals. However, the rising number of veterans receiving VA disability compensation isn't a story about widespread abuse or fraud. It's a story about our nation's continuing efforts to keep the promise to those who have served during multiple wars over the course of generations. In fact, the increase in claims is driven primarily by the PACT Act, a bipartisan legislation enacted in 2022 to finally acknowledge, compensate, and care for veterans who suffered toxic wounds from burn pits, Agent Orange, and other hazards in the line of duty. Rather than impugning the integrity of 6.9 million disabled veterans by implying that only some of them deserve their benefits, we remind the Post that our nation has been at war for most of the last 25 years, exposing millions of men and women to blast injuries, toxic chemicals, psychological trauma, and other mortal dangers. While the Post story focuses on whether a disabled veteran can hold a full-time job, it totally disregards how service-connected injuries and illnesses can impact every aspect of a veteran's life, and in many cases even shorten it. They do not consider how these lifelong wounds, both visible and invisible, impact the families, caregivers, and survivors of those who defended our freedom. We certainly condemn all fraud and believe any criminal act should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But these cases represent just a tiny fraction of the 6.9 million disabled veteran claims that are completely legitimate. They have been approved based on federal laws, regulations, processes, subject to the presentation of significant evidence of the negative impact their service-related injuries and illnesses have on their lives. As the nation's leading veteran advocacy organization representing more than 1 million veterans and family members, all done at no charge to veterans and no profit to DAV, we see firsthand the full price disabled veterans have paid to protect our freedom. We know from the veterans we represent that it's not easy to admit that you have a disability in most cases, and the process of establishing service connection and securing benefits and health care is already difficult. That's why we are outraged that the blatantly misleading conclusion the Post asserts could actually discourage some disabled veterans from seeking the benefits they've earned. Given everything we know about the importance of connecting veterans with a larger community of support, it is irresponsible for the Post to rely on such suspicious and spurious analysis to support a conclusion it appears that they've already reached before they began writing. To those who have served, and particularly our nation's 6.9 million disabled veterans, we thank you for your service. We encourage all our brothers and sisters who are wondering whether they are entitled to benefits and services from the federal government to disregard the Post's disparaging and cynical commentary. Instead, you can reach out to DAV, learn your rights, and help at benefitsquestions.org. And then one more from the VFW commander here. The following letter is from the VFW commander, was submitted to the Washington Post. To the editors of the Washington Post, your recent article, How Some Veterans Exploit $193 billion VA Program Due to Lax Controls, is not just a disservice to veterans. It is dangerously misleading piece that feeds into damning stereotypes and ignores both the moral and legal foundations of the Department of Veteran Affairs disability system. Let's be absolutely clear. Veterans' disability benefits are not charity. They are compensation owed for injuries and conditions incurred of the line of duty, promised by a government that asked men and women to risk their lives and health, often irreversibly, on its behalf. These benefits are not some loopholes for opportunists to exploit. They are the very least this country can do for the people it sent to war repeatedly, especially after more than 2 decades of sustained conflict without a draft. Your article leans heavily on inflammatory anecdotes and edge cases portraying veterans as system abusers while ignoring the structural reality. Combat wounds are not the only occupational hazards of military service. The daily grind of service, exposure to toxic environments, repeated concussions, sleep deprivation, moral injury, sexual trauma, constant stress, and grueling physical demands leaves lasting scars. Just because a veteran wasn't blown up by an IED doesn't mean they aren't disabled. Invisible injuries like PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and toxic exposure related illnesses are not new or suspect. We just finally stopped ignoring them. Every generation of veterans before this one suffered in silence, and many died without care or acknowledgement. To now say that recognizing these conditions is proof of fraud is not only illogical, it is cruel. The article also seems to misunderstand how VA disability ratings work. The system doesn't compensate based solely on whether someone can or can't work. It compensates based on how a service condition impairs a veteran's average ability to function in life and society. The fact that a veteran can hold a job doesn't mean their disability doesn't make their daily life harder, more painful, or more isolating. If VA ratings were solely based on complete incapacity, we wouldn't see skyrocketing rates of veteran suicide, addiction, homelessness, or divorce, all of which are fueled not by fraud, but by the very real and too often dismissed cost of military service. Lastly, let's not ignore what this article reflects. Veterans make an easy scapegoat for the elites of this country. We're a small percentage of the population. Many Americans are disconnected from the wars they authorized or ignored. It is politically and socially convenient to question the integrity of veterans rather than confront the true cost of 25 years of war. But the cost is real, and the obligation to those who bore it is not optional. If your investigative team wants to find waste and fraud, start with the contractors who overbill, the generals who fail upward, the executives of squandered programs, or the politicians who wave flags while gutting oversight. But don't you dare turn on America's sons and daughters who carried the burden of service and now only ask for the care and compensation they were promised. We veterans kept our end of the agreement, and we will continue to demand that those who asked us to defend our nation do the same. Honor the contract. VFW Commander in Chief. So those were the three main responses, Travis, to the article. I feel like they were very well composed and written, and really drove home the point that you and I talked about last week, that they're taking the sins of a few and casting it aspirations across the many of us, and they're also taking it and making the PACT Act and the rising number of claims and making it seem like fraud is rampant and abuse through the system, when really, like one of those articles said, we're just finally doing the right thing and taking care of our veterans. We're finally addressing the Agent Orange from Vietnam. I mean, what, 60 years ago? I mean, these guys have suffered for 60 years not being able to connect something they knew occurred, something that's been published about, something that's been recorded, something that's been documented for decades, and now just finally getting the acknowledgement and the treatment for it. And they're gonna raise the bullshit flag on them for that. And the same thing with the guys with the PACT Act. The water at bases isn't good. The places where military installations are, the food, the chemicals that were ingested, anthrax shots. We are pincushions. The minute you join the service, you go through a line, and they've got little guns with spinning needles, and you pop in the arm, and then you get that nice peanut butter shot in the butt. And you're literally a pincushion as you walk around the station and get everything. And half the time you don't even know what you're getting. For me, I went through Leonard Wood in 2002, and on my medical file, when I was going to go to Iraq in 2004, I noticed that there was a red stamp on my medical file that said pneumonia vaccine study. I had no idea what that meant. I looked at it, I tried to see it and, understand what it was. I had to call back to Fort Leonard Wood, ask around. It wasn't until 10 years later that I saw that recruits have been used for years as part of a pneumonia vaccine study. And, I was one of the people that was part of that study. I must have signed something somewhere along the line that was just to hurry up and, sign this and go. And so I did. And, I was part of this study. I did get pneumonia, 9 weeks into training, wound up having like 103 temperature, hallucinating out in the field. And, went to the hospital for a night and then put some ice chips in my mouth so that way I could get the temperature down enough so I could return to the field so I wasn't kicked back.
We talked about it, right? Where, okay, yes, there are veterans, and we talked about a couple that are in our AO. We know one just down Rhode Island who got busted for some truly heinous, despicable crimes. And I think he got sentenced this week, and I hope they threw the book at him. I really do. No do-overs here, right? And you have any system, someone's going to take advantage of it and not follow the rules. And yeah, the BFW response was right. Yeah, I mean, we're a punching bag. And I wish the Washington Post had put this much effort into, understanding how our borders are insecure or how other, things are being done by people who are not Americans. Well, then, okay, yeah. When you have all that done, you can come through the VA with scorched earth and go to work, right? But until then, I don't know about you, but we've talked about this too, where I've watched like, hey, you're suffering from your military service. Let me open a VA claim for you. No, I don't want to do that. I might be seen as a malinger or a sick bay commando or something like that. And it's wrong that our veteran brothers who came before us, who gave so much, live in suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And someone's like, well, you don't know, you don't understand this person. I said, yeah, I didn't serve in combat. I got hurt while I was in, and I got kicked out for being hurt. When the minute I couldn't meet the Marine Corps standard, it was time for me to go. And I hated it, but looking back, I understand it. And I've told people this, and I will say this now. I would gladly give back every penny that the U.S. government has given me if they could give me my legs the way they were before I joined the Marine Corps.
Yep.
No problem. No problem. But they can't, and they know it. I joined in the 90s. We did tons of boots and use runs we shouldn't have done. We didn't have a running program. We ran because the staff sergeant or the lieutenant were ticked off at the world, so they took it out on us. Which people are like, no, yeah, it does happen. Get in a fight with your wife the night before, you know what? My guys are going to suffer the next day because I can beat them up. Crazy stuff. And I'm like, those boots that we wore back then were not designed for running, and they were barely acceptable for long-term humps. Like, no wonder some of our infantry brethren have hip, back, shoulder problems. So again, I would gladly give back every penny that I was given me, but you can't. You can't. And this winter's coming up, Michael. And, I don't know about you, but I'm going to be like hating life from about mid-December to April. Or every time it gets cold, wet, and rainy, about 45 to 48 degrees, and it's cold and wet and rainy, I'm hating life. Yeah, I don't talk about it a whole lot because it is what it is, but it is what it is. So I'm like thankful. I'm grateful the VA is there to provide care that I need. I'm grateful that, they can help me out. But it's also really frustrating when I'm told, hey, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I've just heard you over talking about your injury. How does the VA say those two aren't connected? I don't know. Am I gaming the system by trying to secure more benefits? I don't think so. I don't
and
think so.
and the fight that most veterans have to do to prove their connection and to prove these claims is a battle in itself that the Post overlooks. Is why would all these people subject themselves to these multiple appointments, these for the mental health aspect of things, the military sexual trauma, the PTSD, the traumatic brain injuries. People are reliving their worst days of their lives in an office with somebody who's cold and doesn't care to get a 20% rating, to get a 30% rating that's gonna put a couple of bucks in your pocket and make sure that you're taken care of for that specific claim, at the VA. It just doesn't, correlate to, veterans would be doing this to, putting themselves through all this suffering for, what it actually, gives you in the end.
Especially when, if you haven't been through the comp and pen process, everybody agrees it's kind of designed to wear you down and make you feel like a less than going through it. Like, you got to come almost like a beggar, hat in hand, and a lot of times you're treated like a nuisance, not somebody who is trying to understand how this system works. So, you know, uh, some people get upset when President Trump calls the news fake news, and it is kind of rude, honestly, to them. But on the other hand, it's like, well, I can see why. I can see why. I took that article personally. I took that article personally, and not so much for me, but again, which I have my own set of beef. I do. But come on, Michael. There's guys and gals suffering right now that are nervous and anxious about even trying to apply and go through that because they feel like they're going to be a less than, or someone's going to sit there and say, "Oh, well, you're not really hurt that bad. Why are you even here?"
Yep. Which brings me to the other article that I want to add in here too. There is a editorial piece from several veterans that have spoke. This is it. So this one is I am a veteran and getting I'm a veteran getting VA benefits, getting VA disability benefits is hard and deeply personal. Readers respond to recent posts. All right, so these are actual veterans like Travis and myself that have gone through the process, that are receiving a disability percentage and have responded to the post editorial section. I am a veteran who relied on Department of Veteran Affairs medical care and earned a disability rating through years of honest assessment, documentation, and examinations. That experience matters. It's real, it's hard, and it's deeply personal. I believe that while exposing abuses is important, the framing of the October 9 front page article, VA disability runs on an honor system, these veterans are defrauding it, sent a message that many of us carry with difficulty, that those few bad actors define the rest of us. The term honor system used in the article felt like a mischaracterization and misunderstanding of the VA disability process. For many veterans, the system is a burden to prove our truth, not an invitation to exploit it. The reporting may spotlight fraud, but it also inadvertently amplifies guilt and stigma among veterans who followed the rules. To read such a story is to wonder whether my own sacrifice is being doubted. I hope future coverage includes more voices of veterans who navigated the system honestly, people who were tested, questioned, doubted, and yet persisted. The compensation and pension process can be as traumatic as the events that led us into those appointments. Think about the most traumatic events of your life, then imagine having to go to someone and relive them in as much detail as you can remember and hope that it's enough to obtain the care that you need. Kenneth Hamilton, San Antonio. The next one is by conflating a long overdue surge in legitimate claims with a few cherry-picked anecdotes of bad actors. The stories in the October 9th front page article about the Department of VA ended up casting millions of veterans as opportunists instead of men and women finally receiving the care they deserve. As an author of the 2022 legislation known as PACT Act, which was the largest expansion of veterans care in decades, I know why claims rose. After decades of delay, Congress and VA finally recognized illnesses tied to Agent Orange, burn pits, and other service-related exposures from Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan. The increase in claims is not evidence of mass frauds. It shows we are keeping our promise to those who served. The men and women who volunteered to defend this country accepted risks to their health with the understanding that the nation would stand by them later. Portraying them as suspects betrays that covenant. Fraud exists in every government program, but the real exploitation is coming from for-profit claim sharks and medical mills that charge veterans thousands in illegal fees while gumming up the claim systems. That's why Representative Chris Pappas, New Hampshire, and I are advancing a bipartisan Guard VA Benefits Act, which is backed by 99 co-sponsors to restore penalties against unaccredited profiteers. Unfortunately, VA's contribution to the article was a partisan deflection, accusing the Post of being far left instead of addressing the systematic weaknesses that let profiteers prey on veterans. Veterans don't need political theater. They need the VA to modernize and enforce the rules. Mark Takano, Washington. The writer who represents California is ranking Democrat on the House Committee of Veterans Affairs. Millions of veterans legitimately rely on Department of Veteran Affairs disabilities, yet the October 9th front page article took a narrow view of complex data and evidence in a way that can only erode public trust in those who served. Every large federal program encounters some mistakes, and veterans benefits are no exception. But the number of confirmed fraud cases is statistically microscopic compared with the millions of legitimate claims filed each year. We already have laws to punish fraud, and those cases should be fully prosecuted. The strength of our all-volunteer force depends on trust. If you serve and sacrifice, your country will stand behind you. When veterans are treated as suspects or their earned benefits are framed as waste, that trust erodes. Every recruit's decision is shaped by how they see veterans treated. VA Secretary Douglas Collins and his team are working to fix long-standing issues, including processing more than 100,000 backlogged claims and addressing modernization, staffing, and infrastructure challenges. Public debate should focus on how to administer these programs responsibly, not sensational cases of abuse that make all veterans look suspect. Accountability is vital, but constructive solutions matter more. Of all the challenges facing veterans in the nation, is VA benefits fraud really the one we should be focusing on? Jim Whaley, Charlotte, North Carolina. And then the next writer is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, CEO of the nonprofit advocacy group Mission Roll Call. The October 9th front page article showed in compelling detail a shocking level of fraud, waste, and abuse. We have to fear from these problems are not limited to the VA but are present in other federal programs, and we have to applaud the administration commitment to rooting out these problems and eliminating them. Administration official solution, however, is to fire federal employees who are not the ones who are guilty. This is like eliminating infectious diseases by getting rid of vaccines. It guarantees more fraud, waste, and abuse, not less, because there are fewer people left to mind the store. It is the responsibility of the Inspector General to police misfeasance to the extent that there was any in federal staff. But unfortunately, as the article noted, the administration is pushing to shrink the Inspector General staff by 15%. The administration needs to tighten up the programs and increase staffing to sufficient levels to run programs well. Monitor where money's going and ensure compliance within the rules. Don't blame the staff. They're not part of the problem. They are part of the solution. Bruce Carney, Fairfax. And, right there is, veterans themselves speaking on this and sharing, what they've gone through and how this, affects them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just like you said, that stigma is something that, we've shared, on here from the beginning. After the stigma is, in our, our intro, and it's part of what war's been about since the beginning. And because that stigma has been around for so long, it keeps veterans suffering in silence. It keeps veterans afraid to go to the VA and make their claims. And the other thing too that springs up every now and again is the stupid debate between combat veterans, garrison veterans, and who's really what. And let me, as a combat vet, let me tell you, anybody who signed is a goddamn veteran. And people that want to, have piss and vinegar over who's what, and that should be the classes or ratings or pecking order of what is completely lost in their sense of service and their sense of what they were a part of, because people don't choose what happens during their time of service. We don't go in saying, hey, maybe something's gonna pop off and we're gonna get to go to combat. You don't join. I joined the National Guard. I didn't know that I was gonna spend 9 years on active duty. Doing 4 tours overseas. Like, no idea. I got given the old 2 weeks a year, 1 week in a month, and it turned out to be a completely different story in the end. And for folks to say that people that are active duty doing this shit day in and day out, just because they didn't go to a theater of operation doesn't mean they didn't spend time afloat. Doesn't mean they didn't spend time, in foreign countries. Didn't mean they didn't spend time, holidays away from their families. Months out in the field. Like, people forget the basic things that are the military, are stressors, are impactful on your physical and mental well-being, not just deployments.
Well, I mean, I didn't serve in combat, and I've had combat veterans tell me that I wasn't shite because I didn't, serve in combat, and I didn't really see anything. I said, well, it's funny. When a couple of Marines got killed in my line of work because of accidents or, just a mistake, felt really real then. We trained like we were going to fight. And then, for me, Michael, I look at what's going on in Ukraine and the fact that the systems, I mean, they trace parts back to the land where we were. The stuff we worked on is being used in Ukraine right now. I know, yeah, they're using all the tactics and techniques and processes that we train with. So we were ready. We were ready. We were ready to defend high value areas if needed, with our lives if necessary. And to me, when you start talking to some people who are, admin people, inventory people, logistics people, and realize they got to move massive amounts of material in a short amount of time so the fight can continue, you can be the biggest, baddest special forces person you are, but it's some E1, E3, O1, making sure that you have food, materials, supplies that is helping you in a way that you'll never see, and they don't get the credit they deserve. So I hate it. I hate seeing it. And to me, if that's the barometer you're going to use to decide whether or not my service is of value, we're probably not going to get along. And I just I can't help that. I can't help it. If that's the way you feel, I can't help it. But it's also hurting more people than it's helping, especially now.
And with a lot of people having their own soapbox with TikTok and with other social media platforms, things can go viral quick, and it's like people need to be careful on what they're saying and how they're saying it, because a lot of these guys, you have esprit de corps and you're proud of your branch and you're proud of what you do, and we shit on other services because that's just how the military is brought up. There's the Army Navy rivalry. There's
Oh yeah,
there's all that, but in the end, we need to realize that we are such a small community, and that we need to look out for each other, because nobody else literally fucking is. Nobody else out there ensuring that we're going to be taken care of for the
no one.
commitment that was promised to us. And that's why, as much trouble and a pain in the ass these legacy VSOs can be, is why they are needed, because we need them down in DC fighting for our benefits and fighting against articles like this, and fighting against the impact that this could have on, politicians in making their next decision. One of the big things that did happen and, was, shot down on and didn't get a vote on was the Major Richard Starr Act. The Major Richard Starr Act was going to allow combat veterans who were forced into retirement, who were medically retired before 20 years, to be able to receive their retirement and their VA disability and compensation both. Because right now it's one or the other. You don't get both unless you're 50% rated and over 20 years of service. If you don't meet those two criteria, you don't get both. So it's like there are veterans out there, and the number of them, I want to say it was less than 40,000 that actually, meet the criteria, that were, medically retired, due to combat situation. And, they're asking, in the Major Richard Starr Act, to be able to get both of those benefits and to not even be put to a vote again this year. This has been going on for several years now, trying to be passed. And for it not to be even voted on again is just such a, disservice to the veteran community. And it's just, to see it, the bill gets support from both parties. The bill gets up to the, the Senate or the House of Representatives, but then they just don't vote on it. They just let it, go into like this limbo stage, and it just sits there in purgatory, and the bill dies out, and then next year they'll try it again. And it's just, we need things like this to be able to pass. We need, if we can put $1 trillion into the Department of Defense, then why can't we, pass, acts like the Major Richard Starr Act to, to help those that, were retired before their 20-year due to a combat-related injury.
Well, I mean, it's time for people to start putting their money where them. And I'm not saying that Americans don't. Certainly, we've seen where, if there's a need, Americans, patriots, will open their wallet, open their hearts, minds, resources to whatever's available. But I'm talking about our elected, leadership, our politicians who sit there during, campaign time. Oh, I'm for the veterans. I'm for the veterans. Okay, well, I'll have to look, but I didn't see any rural senator or anybody else come out and shout this down. And, I'm like, look, just waiting. But I'm like, if this comes up again, I'm going to have to sit there and say, hey, I voted for you. There should have been a letter from your office or a statement made on Capitol Hill, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, that this is reprehensible. So, you can't claim to be for the veterans and then be silent when something like this is written. You just can't. And to your point, yep, I'm like, oh my God, these organizations that people don't want to join, don't want to pay their dues, don't want to go to the meetings. Well, they're the ones stepping up. They're the ones sitting there saying, oh no, not on our watch. And I think you're right to call that out, Mike, because it's very easy to use the Legion and the VFW and the AMVETS, DAV as punching bags. And some of it, they've earned it. Some of it they've earned, absolutely. But, you can't sit there and say they're all bad when they do something like this. That they came out and they had a response within 24 hours, an emphatic response that this is not acceptable. So if you're thinking about joining the VFW or American Legion, this is a good case study about why you should and where your money's going and how they advocate.
And it is just, it's a shame to see that at the local level, there's so much failure in these posts and these, these organizations, that, the top is doing some things correctly, but then up to top two, they've become a business instead of a veterans organization. And that's where I think things are losing too, is, they're running these organizations as, competitive with businesses in the in the fields or in adjacent fields, instead of saying I'm a damn veterans organization. We need to serve our vets. We don't need to be worrying about yearly bonuses and first class flights. The thing that drives me nuts is I understand the need for these conventions and the need for these things, but I see so many of these conventions and these meetings as a bunch of old guys going and getting hammered, and voting for who's going to be the next one to run the place. And it's like they go to these halls or things, and like I've been to like state ones over in Taunton, and like you go, they do 45 minutes to an hour of the voting process, the reading of what's going on, the congratulating certain posts for certain achievements, and then they vote on the next commander, and then it's released for the night, and then it's people are getting white girl wasted, and it's like it's wild to see. And it's just why are they doing these? They host these large ones for the the national organization, and they have them all over the place, and it's these big ballrooms, these big functions, these big events and spectacles that they make out of it. And it's I don't know, I don't see why so much has to go into that versus putting it back into the local programs, putting it back into the states. And like one thing that really bugged me was seeing organizations that do have, a nest egg, that do have, money in the bank to be able to help veterans, but don't have any programs that actually can get that funds out to that veteran whose car is broken down and needs, help to be able to get, a new transmission, or the veteran that, has fallen behind on their oil bill and, needs help to be able to pay that off so that we can heat their home this winter. And like, those are the things that nonprofits are covering down on. But, why can't these VSOs, make more local programs to connect and to be able to get these funds out? If you're sitting there with $26 million in the bank, I understand you can do a lot with that, but why aren't we doing something with it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not against audit, due diligence, or if there's a real issue and a whistleblower blows it, great. A lot of times a veteran gets taken advantage of, or their benefits stolen, or something else nefarious goes on. And a lot of times it's because someone felt something was wrong and didn't say anything. They didn't make a phone call. They didn't send an email because they just didn't know. So to me, if you get called out and you've got nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem. It could be a learning experience. So, see something, say something. And look, if you're not hurt, but you're just trying to game the system, well, shame on you. Because there's somebody else behind you that is hurt, that's trying to navigate the system, or is like, you know what, I'm just done. And then who wins then? And you know who you are. And you should be found out. And if you're messing about like Michael Dare did, and he was extorting people for VA benefits because he worked there, well, then you should be called out and you should be, punished to the highest extent of the law. But people in the PACT Act, you had 27, 25-year-old people, entire intestinal tracts just disintegrate on them. Young women who were infertile because of cancers of their ovaries and stuff like that. Horrible, horrible, horrible stuff. And so we finally get some advocacy for them, and the Washington Post does this. Shame.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that report doesn't feel bad at all because people paid to read the article and they made some money off of it. Shame.
And it's just it's sad to see that this is the pushback on it, and you don't want to see anything happen, and it's good to see the veteran community push back on this, and to push back and say this is not what's happening. but this will, because of the reach that the post has, and because the front page, they put this on the front page, but those opinions and those articles from the commanders of the VSOs, those are on front page.
Nope.
Those were buried in editorials, and those were buried further in the paper that people won't see. Those aren't front page headlines on their website. So it's, as you're sharing it and you're allowing folks to be able to think that this is what's happening, and like one of the posts mentioned, it's building on that stigma. It's showing more people, hey, this is what's happening to our VA. This is what's happening in our system, but it's not really. You're just taking those few bad apples and saying, hey, all of these guys are out there doing this shit when most folks are having a hard time to even get the benefits that they're fighting for. Guys going out there and even proving things that are a presumptive claim now. It's not that easy to just go out there and get that presumptive claim. You go out there and you still have to prove what you've done. I mean, my first time I went to the VA, coming home from the first tour, I had a L5-S1 herniated disc that was pinching the S1 nerves that ran down both of my legs, shooting pain to the bottom of both feet. If I sat down for an extended period of time, both legs would go numb, and when I would stand up, I would fall over. I went into the common pen section. The guy had me touch my toes. He had me touch the top of the doorway, and he told me, go get a job as a cop or something. See you later. And that was my comp and pen the first time I ever went there. And it was like, and this is, what they're telling me, that, folks are going to go through that to, I think they rated me 10% for, the back injury, for the herniated disc, with the, what is it called? Radiopathy or whatever, when it goes down. And so I got 10%, and that was what I had for, for 4 or 5 years until I went and, got reevaluated after I had, back surgery and had, the discectomy. And then, I got rated 40% for it. And it's like, it's just, all that for, I'm missing part of my spine now for the rest of my life, and it's like,
yeah.
And because of that,
it's not coming back. It's not growing back. It's not, you can't go down to CVS or Walgreens and buy one either. It's just it's not ever coming back. You will never be the same again.
And like the doctor told me, once I had the discectomy, he said, because that part of your spine has been taken out, the other discs and the rest of your back and your neck are going to have to compensate for it. So in time, you're going to have more issues with, parts of it. And, last year I had an issue, my C2 through C7 started pinching the nerve that went down my arm. And so into the pinky and the ring finger, it would go completely numb, and into the right here, the finger, the thumb, and the forefinger, it would shoot pain. So if I moved my head slightly to the left or back, either way, it would hit one nerve or the other. And I was in a neck brace for almost 2.5 months until I could do enough physical therapy that was able to bring back and get me taken care of to be able to function again. But that's something that I'm gonna have to worry about for the rest of my life. Is those discs in my neck now are acting up because of the the disc in my lower back being removed.
And what if you couldn't get help?
Yeah. And that's where you see the guys relying on substances, relying on street pharmacists to get the pain to go away. The guys that take a bottle to their face at night to be able to sleep. And it's I've seen so many of these guys. And when I lived at the homeless shelter in Somerville, like I saw guys coming from prior incarceration, guys that had been on the streets for months to years. One guy that had been living in the woods for 11 years before he came into the shelter there. And you see all these veterans going through their struggles, and these guys are all from different things. Some guys were garrison, some guys were combat vets. It didn't matter. What they did and the injury they sustained, and their mental health was being overlooked, and thus added a situation to them that turned into something else and spiraled further and further. And it really did, it shows you that, a small thing like a back injury like that could turn into, a substance abuse issue. It can turn into, a mental health issue. It turns into depression. It ultimately leads to, guys dealing with isolation, and that's where the suicide rate, for the veteran community is the height of where it is. And that's the ultimate thing that we all want to try to prevent is these folks unaliving themselves. And you don't want to see folks going out there and saying that that's the only option that they have. So we just want to make sure that veterans need to know they can go in and be taken care of for what they need. Just because there are assholes out there that are faking it doesn't mean that you need to suffer in silence, that you need to isolate yourself, that you need to, keep, sucking it up and drive on, those, the antidotes and the paradox of, you want to be a hard soldier, you want to be, the tough guy, you still want to be the brave man or woman that you were in uniform now that you're out, but you don't have to be. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be, seen by a doctor. It's okay to address your concerns that you have, whether they're, mental or physical. And, if you're connected to the service, absolutely get with a representative and get the care you need. And don't deal with these guys that are asking for your first 3 months of payment.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Don't let them take your money from you.
Well, I mean, I'm glad we're keeping it in the limelight. I'm surprised how many people didn't know this happened, but I'm glad there's people out there that did. And, hope's not a course of action. But I think the next thing is if something like this happens again, it's a much more emphatic response. And this time I'm going to, ask my elected officials to make a statement on this. So good stuff. Thanks for being super Gumby last night. It was just been a crazy week. And so we'll be back to Thursday night next week.
Absolutely. And Kenny Clifford saying, I've had some of the exact same issues. I think a lot of us need a lawyer advocate more than a psychologist. Receiving justice does wonders for someone's mental morale and overall mental health.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thanks for checking in, Kenny. And, we appreciate you guys, coming over to Friday for us. Sometimes life happens and we just got to roll with it. And thank you guys for checking in on us tonight. And for joining us with W.A.R. Travis, a great show last night. Always appreciate, Oscar Mike Radio, what you got doing over there. And we will see you guys next Thursday, as long as nothing comes up.
We are resilient. We are W.A.R. Thank you for watching, Michael. Thank you for being flexible, and we will see you next time.
All right. Good night, folks. Thank you.